What's up, YouTube? It's I with a Boat, and today on TEPPEN Theory, we are talking about how to tell a good card from a bad card. And this theory is in the category of deck building, and I have two deck lists for us to look at. So first deck list I have is my own. This is a purple growth deck list that I actually did a video about, so you can check that video out in the description below. But I also have a Vera deck list that is a very similar style but a different take. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to talk about for cards in this game is, let's talk about the units. So units, they can come in many different MP costs, and this is how I'll break it down. So 3 MP is kind of like the god number, because 3 MP units mean that you can block with them if your opponent plays a unit. You have exactly 10 seconds before an attack line ends. 10 seconds is 3 MP, which means that 3 MP units are always perfect blocking. You can always use a 3 MP unit to block for you. Now, the next step up is 4 MP units. 4 MP units are essentially, in my opinion, they are better 3 MP units, except they cost more. So if you have a more expensive 4 MP unit, you know, the ability better be good. And going back to 3 MP units, I also want to mention that the current meta, there is so many powerful 3 MP units that it's competitive area. So for a 3 MP unit, it should have a good ability, it should have synergy with your deck, and you know, that's how you determine whether you should play that card or not. Now, once we go to the 5 MP area when it comes to units, and from here on out, if it's a 5 MP card that I'm playing in my deck, it better win me the game. Anything that's 5 MP or more for a unit, no matter what color you are, no matter if you are a dual color, monocolor, it better win you the game. So, if you're ever looking at cards, and here's how I would compare cards. So it's kind of a weird statement, you know, it better win you the game. I think the best measurement for players out there, if you're ever wondering like, oh, okay, this card costs, you know, 5 MP or more, how do I know if it's gonna win me the game, or if it's standard, if it's like up to snuff, if it's, you know, on par with everything else? So here are my suggestions and tips, is that try to study on what everybody's playing in the meta. If you're a champion rank player, you want to know more about what you're facing against. You know, one of the biggest rules in combat is to know your opponent. And if you know what cards they play, study their gameplay, study their strategy, the next thing you can do is you can actually, you know, look at the MP costs of what cards they have. So I'll give you an example. Like, I know Yon Trinity plays Nero,
Father, I'll put it
and Nero is really buff. Nero, at best case scenario, can become a 4/8, 4 MP unit with spillover and just a tank, So that is my standard for a 4 MP unit. That's actually really strong. So we won't find a lot of cards as strong as that, but we'll definitely find cards that have similar, you know, value. And for our deck, we do have one 4 MP unit, and that's a Mago. So a Mago is a 4 MP unit, and it's for very good reason. It's because of how powerful a Mago's ability is. So a Mago's ability is, if a friendly units have leveled up 5 or more times, meaning growth, return a random enemy unit with 2 attack or less to the enemy deck. And I want to point out that 2 attack is actually the average for most units. Like, even a 6 MP Tyrant is a 2 attack unit. A 5 MP Heavenly Kicks Chun is a 2 attack unit. There's so many 2 attack units. Even Valstrax is a 5 MP unit that's 2 attack. A Mago can hit them all and make them go back into the deck. So just having a card that counts as a unit but also double ups as a card that removes an enemy unit, you know, on play, you know, just like that, that is what I'm talking about. If I'm going to pay more MP than a 3 MP unit, it better have a good ability. And that's why Imago's in this deck. And that's how I can compare it to Nero as well. Because Nero is just a tank. They probably kill multiple cards before Nero goes to the grave. And that's the same idea with Imago. With Imago, I'll definitely get a lot of mileage out of it. You never really want to play a unit that doesn't serve a purpose. And there are going to be cards like that. They're a little bit hard to identify, but what you're looking for is strong value, some explosiveness, and if it's not explosive or it's not, that good, why are you playing that card? I do want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions in Teppen, and that's that MP boost units are amazing. MP boost units are good, and in Trinity they're even better. But I have seen decks where a lot of players will put in the MP boost units, but they don't have an end goal. At least with Trinity, with Chun-Li Yan, there's an end goal. Like you have Rainy Turtloid, you have Nero, you have the Trinity. Those are your end game goals. But there should never be a deck where you have a bunch of MP boost units with no MP, goals at the end. And even if you have an end goal, you want to make sure that you have a strong early game as well. Because once you have the MP boost units, you can play the Nero, you can play the Rainy Turtloids. That'll give you the, the earliness that you want. But I do want to remind you that the MP boost units are only as good as long as they stay alive. If you play too many of them and they don't stay alive, what did you really pay for? You paid for a MP boost unit to break even? Nah, that's not the way. If you play MP boost units, make sure that your deck is built in a way that it synergizes with MP boost units, and that whatever unit that you play, which is the MP boost unit, overpays for what you initially invested in. And while I talk about all the MP boost units, I'm actually saying the same thing for Teppen in general. If you ever have a card in the game, make sure that the card that you played at least did its job, right? It's kind of like the saying, you're only as weak as your weakest link. And if you play a card that serves no purpose, that definitely reflects in your deck, it reflects in your gameplay, and you want to try and identify that as soon as possible. Some cards, they just don't synergize with your deck as much as you would like it to. Alright, let's look at the viewer deck that we have here, and let's talk about a few things that I'm not very comfortable with this deck. So the first things is Kuroda Kanbei is obviously the core card, and we've already talked about Date and Lilith. Let's talk about Usagi Kenshin. Here we go. So Usagi Kenshin is actually an amazing 3-drop unit, but the problem is that there's no synergy here for the deck. Okay. Usagi Kenshin, if you play this card and you play Kuroda Kanbei and you play Dante, the synergy is lacking because you normally want, actually I guess is not synergetic. It's just a solid 3-drop unit now that I think about it. I will say that this deck is very reliant on the 5-drops. As soon as you have the 5-drops and your opponent kills it, you do lose a lot of your momentum, and then you have to save up mana and try and set up again. And then while you're trying to set up again, your opponent's probably just like hammering you with a bunch of units attacking you. So there's no plan B with this deck. If you lose your 5-drop unit, you have to sit and wait for a minute. There's no plan B. Whereas in my deck, if they kill my 5 MP units, I can at least go into like Dalsim, Keyfoth Roots, and even Imago if I even get the growth off. but I have, you know, alternate game plans, is what I'm trying to say.
I will fulfill my duty as a maverick hunter.
Next thing, let's take a look at One-Eyed Dragon's value. So this purple growth deck is actually not really an aggressive deck. I guess this one is because you have Dante in here, and then you can also buff your units. So I guess in this deck, this card makes sense. But in my deck, it doesn't really make sense at all, just because the way I built the deck is all focused around board control, like Dhalsim, Keyfoth Roots, Imago. They are all board control pieces. But this deck, now that I'm looking at it a second time, I'm starting to notice that it is aggressive, and it's playing a different game plan now that I look at it again. So I guess this card does make sense, and it is synergetic. But let's talk about Bone Divination. Okay, this card I will definitely not let up on. So this is how you tell a good action from a bad action, is you kind of have to follow the MP. It's kind of like following the money, right? So this card is a 1 MP action, and what happens when you play an action? You try to resolve the ability, but you're also giving your opponent 2 MP, right? So for 1 MP, I play this card, and I give my opponent 2 MP. So what do I get out of giving my opponent 2 MP? I can give one of my friendly units with max growth, death, gain plus 2 MP. So if all goes, you know, to plan, effectively this card will only net me 1 MP, but I just gave my opponent 2 MP. So for me, opening myself up to the action phase, giving 2 MP to my opponent, I'm pretty much at their mercy, right? They could potentially kill my growth unit, and then I'll lose everything. I'll lose my unit, I'll lose my Bone Divination, and I just gave my opponent 2 MP. So they are accelerating faster, you know, going through their deck, getting closer to their hero art. This card is just not that good for the payout. Like, at least with Mastery Hado, you get 3 MP, and the card is not as bad. Actually, with Mastery the Hado, you have the ability to use Self-Predation, whereas purple has no card like that. So I guess if we had a card like Self-Predation, this card would be significantly better. But because it leaves us an opening and there's not enough payout, I highly don't think that this card is any good at all. Like, I wouldn't even play it in this build or even in my build. But looking over this deck again, it's a lot better than I thought at first. I will say that it does fall susceptible to having to rely on your 5 MP units so much, because as soon as they're gone, you have to set up all over again, and it's going to be pretty difficult for you. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, just make sure that whatever cards you play, they are synergetic to whatever you're doing. Like, because of how this card works, it's not synergetic to my deck, which is all about board control. But their deck, because their deck is more aggressive and has damage scaling, then I guess, you know, an instant attack card makes sense. But it doesn't make sense in my board control deck. You know, some other concepts I want to give to you before this video ends is, remember that you and your opponent always have the same amount of MP from start to finish, unless you somehow manipulate it with like MP boost or whatever. But because you have the same amount of MP, you want to make sure that whatever your opponent is doing with their MP, you're matching it, or you're mitigating their MP. That's what we call the war of attrition. You want to make sure that you're at least keeping up, if not, you know, bringing your opponent down with you when it comes to resources. So make sure every time that you look at a card that you're thinking to yourself, oh, maybe this card isn't that good. Maybe I'm not getting a lot of mileage out of it. I'll give you an example here. Like Naoi, this card can become invulnerable to damage for 13 seconds. That makes this card significantly better than any 3-drop I've seen in a while. Because the reason why this card is so good is that once you are immune to damage, you can trade twice. You can trade 2 damage trades, which means that for a 3-drop, it's dealing 4 damage from its ability. But then also, once it's finished with its ability, it stays as a unit, it continues to deal damage, it's still there. But let's kind of look for a bad 3 MP unit. I'm not sure if we can find one, you know, pretty easily here. Oh, here, how about this? This card is a new unit. It's actually kind of good, because you would play this with Tension. Okay, bad example. Let's look for... Okay, how about this one? Tobi Kadachi. This card is actually okay, it's just not that strong, it's not that fast. Goodness, I probably should have planned ahead. Okay, how about this one? Okay, this one is kind of a good example. So this card, when played, give +1 attack to a random friendly unit with growth. Now, the reason why this card is probably not as good as you would want it to be is just that there are better options. So the biggest synergy with this card is you would want to use it with Ume or Rashid, because you can give it +1 attack and then their growth abilities will trigger, meaning that they deal 1 more damage. But there's actually an even better card than this card. And that is the basic card, Isun. So Isun says that whenever a friendly unit levels up, deal 2 damage to a random enemy unit. So you just kind of have to look for cards that do an effect better. You know, just because this card gives attack and it would be best used with a burn unit, playing Isun actually gives you an additional damage, you know, for board clearing. So it's just better in that regard. But also, it's also flexible to other growth units, so like Chill Penguin or Hayabusa. Like, these cards don't have Ume or Rashid's ability where they damage ping. But Isun makes it so that they, every time they grow, they do deal damage. So in a burn deck, that's really powerful. Oh, here's another card that's not very good. Brad Vickers. So why would I ever really want to pay 3 MP for a unit where if it dies it gives +1/+1 to another enemy friendly unit? The problem with this card is it's too slow for very little payout. Like I said, the 3 MP units, there's a very competitive field for them. So if it's not, you know, all up to snuff, you probably don't want to play this at all. It's so little value for that amount of MP. But you know what? I think I have a good idea. I'm going to show you some cards, and that way this will help you figure out if the card you're playing is a good card or not. So let's talk about the best 3 MP units ever. Gate, which is when it dies, it gives you 1 MP, and then also it has a dive bomb effect. So Gate is actually the best 3 MP unit ever. Junie, when she dies, you gain 1 MP, so she's effectively a 2 MP unit. And then Zombie, you know, when they die, you gain +1 MP. You also get another zombie in your deck. So these units, because they are very cheap, you get to play them and they pay for themselves back. They are the best 3 MP units. If the card that you're thinking about playing does not, you know, have a similar value to them, if not like half, it's probably a bad card. And then the next card I want to use this comparison for 4 drops
I'll put an end to their
is probably Nero. You want it to at least have like half the value of Nero if you're trying to play a 4 drop, if not better. Nero is probably the best 4 drop in the game right now because of how much stats it can gain and how it can carry itself out. And then next, but not least, the best 5 MP unit in the game, even though it's not doing so hot right now. If you're paying 5 MP or more for a unit, I would like it to be at least somewhere near powerful as Valstrax. Valstrax can carry games by themselves. If you're paying for that amount of MP or more, you would want it to have a strong impression in the game, just like Valstrax does. As soon as you drop Valstrax, it's a game against the clock. If your opponent has the card to deal with it, great. If they don't, you know, you just win. And I do want to say something about actions. If you're ever playing an action, just make sure that however much you're paying for the MP for that card, just make sure that it reflects in value of what's going on the board. You know, if it's going to win you the game, if it's going to make a trade better for you, if it's going to make you cycle through your deck faster, if it's going to, you know, counter an opponent's card. That's why a lot of actions being played are usually just counter cards or cards that make your deck go faster. But there are also some really expensive action cards that are just not worth it. You know, like Nibble. Why would I ever want to pay 3 MP to deal 2 to 4 random damage? Or let's see here. What's another bad card? Walty Knight. Even worse. 5 MP to deal 5 damage. Or Magic Seal. You know, 7 MP to bounce an enemy unit and then lock the board slot for 10 seconds. It's just very underwhelming. You know, as TEPPEN goes on, there's even more and more powerful card abilities. The best way I can really explain and tie it all together is you really want to study the meta. You want to study what players are doing. And luckily for you, I actually write meta snapshots every season in meta. So you can check out my Game Press content if you don't already follow me on Twitter. That is where I post all of my TEPPEN content so you can stay current. And realistically, to understand how to better deck build, you kind of want to understand the game a little bit better, understand your opponents, and then make them the standard so that way you can try and keep up. I think that's the fastest way to get that learning curve for learning this game and then quickly figuring out, like, oh, this is the difference between a good card and a bad card. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you again for watching. Have a good one.